Go back to India. The words cut through the air like shattered glass, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Conversations halted, heads turned, and the weight of that insult hung heavy in the room. It wasn't just a jab at Kash Patel, it was a dagger aimed at millions of immigrants, at the very idea of belonging. The kind of phrase that carries centuries of exclusion. Every whispered "you don't belong here" condensed into 4 venomous words, and there she stood, Karoline Leavitt, smirking with a confidence that wasn't earned but performed. Believing this line would rattle him, believing this line would draw applause. But instead, it revealed something else entirely. In a single sentence, the mask of arrogance slipped, and the world saw what lay beneath, a disdain not just for Patel, but for anyone who dared to call themselves American while carrying a heritage that stretched. Beyond these shores, the silence that followed was deafening. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to see who would break first. Others leaned in, eager to see if Patel would stumble, if he would lash out, if he would crack under the weight of an insult meant to reduce him. And in that pause, in that fragile stillness, you could feel the stakes rise, because this wasn't just about 2 people sparring in a debate hall. This was about what America really meant, about who gets to claim it, who gets to defend it, and who gets to say, without fear, "This is my country too." The cameras captured every second. Leavitt's smugness, Patel's stillness, the crowd's anticipation. Millions would replay this clip again and again, dissecting every gesture, every flicker of expression. Was this the moment Patel's composure cracked? Or was it the moment he stepped into history? What no one in that room realized, what no one could predict, was that Patel wasn't about to fight fire with fire. He wasn't going to lower himself into the pit where arrogance thrived. Instead, he was preparing to do something far more devastating, because sometimes the most powerful answer doesn't come from anger. It comes from dignity. But no one in that room expected the way Kash Patel would answer. Karoline. Yes. Leavitt isn't a household name, at least. Not yet. But in the world of MAGA politics, she's been branded the rising star, the fresh face who's supposed to bring youth, aggression, and unshakable loyalty to the movement. Barely in her late 20s, she's been packaged as the sharp-tongued disruptor who doesn't flinch when it comes to pushing the boundaries of rhetoric. For her supporters, that means a willingness to say out loud what others might only hint at. For her critics, it means recklessness, dressed as bravery. On that stage, that moment, she leaned into the persona she's been crafting, fearless, brash, unapologetically cruel. And when she hurled those 4 words at Kash Patel, it wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move. She wanted a soundbite. She wanted to dominate the headlines. She wanted to leave him diminished. But what she didn't realize was that this single insult was bigger than Kash Patel. It wasn't just one politician talking down to another wit. Was a line in the sand about identity, about belonging, about who gets to be considered American. The cameras were everywhere, their red lights glowing like watchful eyes. Every network had their lenses trained on the stage, capturing every syllable, every expression. Social media feeds lit up in real time as the insult ricocheted across phones and timelines. You could feel the ripple starting, even before Patel opened his mouth. Some gasped, some chuckled, others immediately reached for the record button, knowing this clip was destined to spread like wildfire. And here's why the moment carried so much weight. America has always been divided over the question of who belongs, from Ellis Island to border walls, from whispered slurs in classrooms to shouted slogans at rallies. This question has never truly disappeared. Immigrants have been told, time and again, that no matter their service, no matter their sacrifice, they are still outsiders in someone else's eyes. So when Leavitt sneered, "Go back to India," she wasn't just speaking to Patel. She was speaking to every immigrant. Family who's ever been told they don't belong. Every child who's been asked, "Where are you really from?" She was dragging those ghosts back into the room, daring Patel to carry them on his shoulders, and the audience knew it. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, aware of the ugliness on display. Others leaned forward, hungry to see how he would respond. The air itself seemed to tighten, as though the nation's oldest wounds were being ripped open on stage, right before their eyes. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was America staring at its reflection, forced to confront the cracks in its identity. Was belonging a matter of bloodlines, or was it about values? Was dignity earned through service and sacrifice, or erased with one venomous insult? Kash Patel, standing at that podium, carried more than his own reputation in that moment. He carried the weight of every immigrant who had ever been told to go back. He carried the dignity of families who had built lives here, who had served, who had paid taxes, who had lost loved ones in wars fought under the American flag. Leavitt thought she was landing a knockout punch. What she didn't know was that she had set the stage for something much bigger than herself, because what Patel was about to say would not only defend his own honor, it would flip the script on an entire movement, and what Patel said next would flip the script entirely. Karoline Leavitt's story has been sold to the public as the American dream repackaged for a new generation of conservatives. She is young, ambitious, and camaradia, self-styled disruptor who insists she represents a fresh voice in politics. Her supporters describe her as sharp, articulate, and unafraid to take on the so-called elites. At campaign rallies, she talks about freedom, patriotism, and giving a voice to the people forgotten by Washington. On paper, it looks like the perfect rise, a young woman breaking through the ranks of politics, blazing her trail in an arena still dominated by older men, but the image she projects under bright stage lights doesn't tell the whole story. Behind the curated persona lies a different figure, brash, impatient, and willing to cross any line if it means applause. Where some see courage, others see recklessness. Where her fans cheer her bluntness, critics point to a streak of cruelty that keeps surfacing comments that go beyond spirited debate and dip into outright disdain. She markets herself as polished, yet she thrives on provocation. She speaks of civility but delights in the sound bites that stir outrage. She sells herself as a fighter for America's future, but often does so by dismissing entire groups of Americans in the present. The contradiction is her brand. Clean speech is written for the camera, paired with the off-script venom that her base celebrates as telling it like it is. And the truth is, she knows exactly what she's doing. Every insult, every sharp-edged line is designed for maximum exposure. In today's politics, controversy is currency, and Leavitt has built her career on cashing in. She understands that social media doesn't reward nuance, it rewards shock. So she leans into the outrage cycle again and again, because it keeps her name trending and her image rising. But there's a danger in that strategy, a flaw baked into the performance. The higher you climb on arrogance, the steeper the fall when that arrogance finally collapses. And on that stage, when she turned to Kash Patel with a smirk and said, "Go back to India," it wasn't just another jab. It was arrogance tipping into overreach. The moment where calculation turned to carelessness. The irony is that Leavitt's rise was built on claiming to fight for real Americans, yet her insult exposed something else, a narrow, exclusionary view of who qualifies as real. For a woman who preaches patriotism, she showed contempt for a man who had dedicated his life to national service. For someone who insists she stands for the people, she revealed disdain for millions of people whose stories mirror Patel's, and the public saw it. The audience saw it. That's the risk of playing the villain. You might keep control of the stage for a while, but eventually the mask slips. The polished speeches no longer hide the raw contempt. The branding collapses under the weight of a single moment too ugly to spin. That night, Leavitt thought she was seizing control of the debate. She believed the insult would diminish Patel, box him in, and remind the audience who held the power on that stage. Instead, she revealed the cracks in her own image. Because in the end, the line didn't make her look strong, it made her look small. But arrogance has a way of overplaying its hand. And Leavitt, basking in her own confidence, never considered the possibility that Kash Patel wouldn't just defend himself, he would turn her insult into a defining moment, one that would ripple across the country. She had underestimated him from the start. She thought of Patel as just another opponent to swat aside with a soundbite. But Patel was more than that. He was the son of immigrants who had risen through determination, discipline, and loyalty to America. He was a man who had weathered storms tougher than cheap insults, carried the weight of service and sacrifice with quiet dignity. Leavitt didn't see it. She didn't prepare for it. She didn't even imagine that the calm man standing across from her was about to shatter her entire performance. And Patel was the one opponent she never should have underestimated. Kash. Patel's story doesn't begin under bright lights or in the halls of power. It begins in the quiet struggles of an immigrant family who came to America with little more than determination. His parents arrived with hope tucked into their pockets, leaving behind the familiar streets of India for the unknown challenges of a new world. They worked long hours, sometimes at jobs beneath their qualifications, simply to carve out a stable life for their children. They believed deeply in American, just as a place, but as a promise. And they passed that belief to their son. As a child, Patel grew up in a home where sacrifice wasn't a burden, it was the baseline of life. His parents told him that in America, nothing was given, but everything was possible. So he studied hard. He learned discipline early. He carried with him the immigrant's lesson: never waste opportunity. Because opportunity is what your parents sacrificed everything for. That drive shaped him. While some children dreamed loosely, Patel's ambitions were laser-focused. He wanted to serve, to protect, to prove that the American flag wasn't just a symbol on a wall. It was a responsibility. He pursued law, not as a way to profit, but as a way to safeguard the very ideals that gave his family a future. Then came his leap into national security and intelligence, where the stakes weren't measured in dollars or headlines, but in lives and freedoms, working. Inside the government's most secretive chambers, Patel wasn't chasing fame. Most of his work was invisible to the public, but its weight was immense. He helped track threats, disrupt terror networks, strengthen the security that millions of Americans never had to think twice about. While politicians traded barbs on television, Patel was behind the scenes, making sure America's enemies never gained the upper hand. And yet, despite his quiet loyalty, Patel was never blind to the contradictions around him. He knew that while he was dedicating his life to defending America, there were those who would still look at him and see only an outsider. He knew that no matter how many hours he gave, no matter how many crises he helped avert, there were people waiting to remind him of his skin color, his last name, his parents' birthplace. That awareness never hardened him. It humbled him. It gave him resolve. Because for Patel, patriotism wasn't just words, it was lived sacrifice. He watched his parents work when they were exhausted, watched them swallow indignities in silence, watched them hold faith in a country that didn't always extend kindness back, and he carried that forward. Not with resentment, but with determination, to prove that dignity wins where hatred fails. Over time, Patel's journey became a testament to the American dream. The boy who grew up in a modest immigrant household rose to stand in the corridors of power, trusted with the nation's deepest secrets, advising on matters that shaped global security. It was the immigrant arc at its finest. From the son of newcomers to a defender of the country that gave his family a chance. And that's what made the insult so cruel, yet so revealing. To tell Kash Patel to go back to India wasn't just to insult him. It was to deny the very essence of his story. It was to erase the sweat of his parents, the discipline of his youth, the service of his career. It was to suggest that loyalty and sacrifice meant nothing if you didn't fit a narrow vision of who belongs. But here's where the story bends toward something greater. Patel didn't carry bitterness for those who doubted him. Instead, he carried a calm assurance that his worth was already proven not by words, but by actions. He didn't need to raise his voice or trade insults. His life itself was an answer, louder and clearer than any slur could ever be. The audience, whether they knew his full story or not, could sense it in the way he stood. They could see in his composure the weight of someone who had nothing left to prove because he had already lived the proof. When Leavitt hurled her insult, what collided wasn't just a debater's was two visions of America. One narrow, exclusionary, rooted in arrogance. The other expansive, inclusive, rooted in dignity, and that's why the stakes felt so high. Viewers weren't just watching Patel. They were watching themselves, their families, their histories reflected back. For every immigrant who had been told to leave, for every child who had felt like an outsider, Patel's story wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. The irony was stark. Leavitt wanted to cast Patel as the outsider, but in truth, Patel embodied the American story far more deeply than she ever could. He wasn't just a participant in the system. He was a guardian of it. He wasn't just claiming the flag. He had defended it. And that's why, in the seconds after her insult, Patel's silence was powerful. Because the audience understood, maybe even before he spoke, that every chapter of his life had prepared him for this exact moment. The air in the debate hall was no longer neutral, it was charged. Brittle, almost electric. Karoline Leavitt leaned on her podium with the ease of someone convinced she had already won. The smirk on her face widened as murmurs swept across the crowd. Some gasping at her insult, others chuckling nervously, unsure how to react. She fed off it, like a performer basking in applause. She believed this was her moment to dominate. She pressed forward, unwilling to let the silence settle. "This is America," she said sharply, gesturing toward Patel as though he were a prop. "And if you don't like it here, maybe you should find somewhere else. Maybe you'd be more comfortable back in the country your parents came from." Her words dripped with the same smugness, each line harsher than the last, doubling down on the cruelty that had already stunned the room. A few claps broke out from the far corner, but they sounded hollow, forced, quickly drowned by the uncomfortable shuffling of feet and the faint cough of someone who wished the moment would end. Patel didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, hands resting lightly on the podium. His eyes fixed on her, not in anger, not in shock, but in quiet observation. He let her keep talking. Every interruption, every jab, every sneer only added weight to the rope she was tying around herself. Leavitt interrupted him even when he hadn't yet spoken, filling the silence with digs meant to provoke. "You can try to spin it however you want, but Americans deserve leaders who understand this country, not people who just got lucky being here." The words echoed through the hall, sharp and dismissive, like a gavel slamming down again and again. The tension built like a rising drumbeat. The camera zoomed closer, catching the glint in her eyes, the tightening of Patel's jaw, the anxious faces in the audience. Someone whispered under their breath, "Is he going to say something?" But Patel remained composed, refusing to be baited. The more she spoke, the more the room shifted. What had started as a confident attack began to feel excessive, desperate even. Each insult revealed less about Patel and more about her, painting her not as a fighter but as a bully, intoxicated by her own voice. Still, Patel said nothing. He allowed the silence between her jabs to grow longer, heavier, until the audience leaned forward in their seats. It was as though the entire hall was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when he would finally answer. Leavitt tried to push further, her tone sharper now, her smile tightening. "If you really cared about this country, you'd admit the truth. People like you people, who don't share our roots, our traditions, you'll never understand what it means to be a real American." The words landed with a thud, too harsh even for some of her supporters. A few groans rippled through the crowd. The smirk faltered for just a second, but she forced it back. Unwilling to show weakness, Patel lifted his chin slightly, still calm, still unshaken. His silence now had power. It wasn't the silence of someone cornered. It was the silence of someone in control. The crowd could feel it. The cameras could see it. The longer he waited, the more the balance of power shifted away from her and toward him. And then it happened. Patel leaned ever so slightly toward the microphone, his hand brushing the podium as he prepared to speak. The room stilled instantly, every eye locked on him, every ear waiting for the words they knew were coming. Even Leavitt, mid-smirk, glanced sideways as if bracing herself. The heartbeat of the room slowed to a crawl. The silence was no longer awkward, it was cinematic, like the pause before the climax of a film. Every second stretched, the anticipation unbearable. And then, with a pause that felt like forever, Patel finally spoke. When Kash Patel finally leaned into the microphone, his voice wasn't raised, his tone wasn't heated. It was calm, measured, deliberate, the exact opposite of the chaos Karoline Leavitt had been trying to provoke. That composure alone was disarming. "You know," he began softly, "my parents came to this country with nothing but hope. They worked jobs most people wouldn't even notice, just to give me the chance to stand here today." The hall was silent. Every word landed with precision, not as a counterpunch, but as a statement of truth. Patel's voice carried not just his own story, but the stories of millions of families whose sacrifices had gone unseen. "They believed in America," he continued, "even when America didn't always believe in them. And they raised me to believe that if you serve this country, if you give it your all, you belong here just as much as anyone else." Leavitt shifted at her podium, her smirk thinning. She wasn't laughing anymore. Patel's eyes locked on her, not with anger, but with quiet strength. "So when you tell me to go back, you're not really talking to me. You're talking to every immigrant family who's worked their fingers raw to build a life here. You're talking to the children who pledge allegiance every morning in classrooms across this nation. You're talking to the soldiers who risked their lives even though their parents weren't born on this soil." The audience gasped. A murmur spread across the hall. The tension was breaking, not in Leavitt's favor, but in Patel's. And then he sharpened the blade. "I've spent my career serving this country. I've worked in national security and intelligence, the places where the stakes aren't about applause lines, but about American lives. While some people were crafting slogans, I was helping to stop terrorists. While others were chasing headlines, I was defending freedoms." A flicker of applause broke out, tentative at first, then spreading. Patel didn't pause for it. He kept going, his voice steady, unshaken. "So if you think telling me to go back diminishes my Americanness, you're mistaken. It diminishes yours. Because real patriotism isn't measured by insults hurled at people who look different. It's measured by what you give back, by what you're willing to sacrifice. And on that score, my record speaks for itself." Leavitt's smile collapsed into a stiff line. She glanced at her notes, then back at Patel, suddenly aware that the audience was no longer with her. Patel's words began to swell, carrying an emotional force that was impossible to ignore. "America isn't about where your parents were born. It's about what you believe in, what you fight for, what you contribute. That's the promise my parents believed in, the promise I've lived by, and the promise that millions of immigrant families still believe in today." The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the hall, people rising from their seats. Some cheered, some whistled. Others clapped with the kind of force that comes not just from agreement, but from relief that someone had finally said what needed to be said. Patel didn't bask in it. He waited, letting the applause wash over him, his hands still calmly resting on the podium. When the room quieted again, he leaned forward. His voice softened, but his words cut even deeper. "When you told me to go back, you reminded us all of an old wound in this country. A wound immigrants have carried for generations. But here's the truth. Every time someone tries to send us back, we stand taller. We plant roots deeper. We prove again and again that this country is ours too, and no insult will ever erase that." The hall shook with another wave of applause. Cameras panned across faces in the audience, some teary-eyed, others nodding fiercely. Even a few who had been on Leavitt's side moments earlier were now shifting uncomfortably, unwilling to be seen clapping for her. Leavitt tried to interject, fumbling for her microphone. "That's not," she began, but the audience drowned her out with cheers. Her attempt to regain control only made her look smaller, or desperate. Patel pressed the advantage, though he never raised his voice. "So let me be clear. I'm not going anywhere. My family isn't going anywhere. We are America. And every immigrant child sitting at home tonight, hearing those words go back, I want you to know, you don't have to go anywhere. This is your home. You belong. And your story matters." It was the knockout moment, the mic drop line that sealed the debate. The crowd leaped to its feet, applause cascading like thunder, shouts of agreement echoing through the hall. Even people watching on their phones, their laptops, their TVs miles away, would feel it in their bones. The calm dignity of Patel had obliterated the venom of Leavitt, She stood frozen, her face betraying the unraveling. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. Her body language betrayed her collapse, her eyes darting. Her hands gripping the podium a little too tightly, her posture no longer triumphant but defensive. She had thrown her best punch. It had been met with a counterstrike of grace and power that shattered her performance. Patel, meanwhile, stood taller than ever. Not because he had shouted, but because he hadn't. Not because he had attacked, but because he had defended his story, his dignity, and the values that defined America at its best. The debate stage had transformed. What had begun as a platform for Leavitt's ambition had turned into a stage for Patel's truth. And that truth had resonated far beyond the walls of that hall. The audience could feel it. The cameras had captured it. The internet was about to amplify it, because what Patel had just delivered wasn't simply a response, it was a statement, a turning point, a declaration that would echo far beyond this one night. But the real shockwaves were just beginning, far beyond that debate hall. Section 7. The Aftermath Shockwaves, 800 Words. The moment Patel's words echoed off the walls of that debate hall, they didn't just stay there, they ignited like a spark on dry grass. Spreading across the country at lightning speed, within minutes, clips of the exchange began circulating online, posted by journalists, activists, and even ordinary attendees who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. By the time Patel stepped off stage, hashtags were already trending. Hashtag stand with Kash. Hashtag go back no more. On Twitter, one user wrote, "That wasn't just a debate moment. That was history. Patel stood up for every immigrant family in America tonight." Another added, "Leavitt through hate. Patel gave us hope. Guess who America is going to remember?" The post racked up hundreds of thousands of likes within hours. Memes followed quickly. Side-by-side shots of Leavitt's smug smirk collapsing into panic became instant internet currency. Someone clipped Patel's calm line, "We are America," and set it to soaring music. TikTok stitched his speech with montages of immigrant workers, soldiers, doctors, teachers, all the unseen threads of America's fabric, while captions blazed across the screen. "Go back? We never left." Late-night comedians joined the fray. On one show, the host quipped, "Karoline Leavitt told Kash Patel to go back to India. Well, tonight, she might want to go back to debate prep." The audience roared with laughter. Another host played Patel's closing words, then simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you shut down ignorance. No punchline necessary," but the most powerful validation didn't come from comedians or influencers. It came from everyday Americans. Stories poured out online threads, and videos of people recounting their own brushes with the same ugly insult. A nurse in California wrote, "They told me to go back when I first wore my hijab at work. Tonight." I cried watching Patel say what I never could in that moment. A teacher in Ohio posted, "My parents came from Mexico with nothing. We built a life here. Kash Patel spoke for us tonight. I feel seen." The ripple effect reached the media fast. Cable news anchors played the exchange on loop, dissecting every beat. Some conservative commentators struggled, trying to spin Leavitt's words as a misstep or heat-of-moment remark, but the footage betrayed them. She had meant it. Patel had crushed it. Progressive outlets, meanwhile, hailed it as a defining moment, framing Patel as a symbol of resilience and dignity under fire. Even rivals who disagreed with his politics felt compelled to acknowledge the power of his response. One prominent figure tweeted, "We may not agree on policy, but tonight, Kash Patel showed the best of America." The divide was clear. Leavitt became the face of petty cruelty, while Patel became the face of something larger, a reminder of the promise of belonging. The debate, once expected to fade into the usual cycle of partisan bickering, had morphed into a cultural reckoning, and the numbers didn't lie. Patel's speech racked up millions of views overnight. Hashtags soared into global trending lists. By morning, newspapers from New York to Los Angeles carried headlines like, "Patel turns insult into defining debate moment." Editorials praised his poise, calling it a rare injection of dignity into American politics. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from immigrant households across the country. In living rooms and kitchens, Families replayed Patel's words for their children. Parents leaned down and whispered, "Listen to him. That's us. That's our story too." For them, it wasn't just about one man standing up to an insult. It was about reclaiming a piece of America they had always felt, but rarely saw, reflected so powerfully on stage. Meanwhile, Leavitt faced the opposite trajectory. Her insult didn't age like a soundbite. It curdled like spoiled milk. Commentators replayed her smirk side by side, with Patel's quiet power, and the contrast was damning. What she thought would be her viral moment became her undoing. Still, even as Patel's words traveled across screens, headlines, and living rooms, there was a lingering question. Was this just a one-night firestorm, or the beginning of something deeper? Could a single debate moment really shift the narrative about who belongs in America? That uncertainty only added to the drama. The world had seen Patel's brilliance in the spotlight. But what he chose to do once the cameras were off that would determine whether this was a fleeting viral clip or the spark of something enduring. And yet what Patel did after the cameras turned off may be his most powerful move of all. When the storm of debate settled, when the memes and headlines began to crystallize into history, one truth rose above the noise. Patel had not just answered an insult, he had rewritten its meaning. With composure steadier than steel, he turned Leavitt's cruelty into something larger than politics, something timeless. He stood in front of cameras, his voice measured, yet unwavering. "No one gets to tell an American where they belong." That sentence carried more force than 1,000 rebuttals. It was simple, but it was undeniable. And in those words, millions heard not just Patel's story, but their own. The insult meant to diminish him became a mirror reflecting America's deepest promise, that identity is not weakness, that heritage is not a liability, that belonging is not something to be granted by the arrogant, it is something inherited by all who call this country home. Dignity always outweighs arrogance. Inclusion always eclipses hate. Patel's calm became its own lesson. In the face of sneers and interruptions, he hadn't shouted or sputtered. He had not matched rage with rage. Instead, he showed that restraint can roar louder than fury, that truth spoken calmly can pierce through bluster like glass. His very posture told the story, a man unbroken. It's a man who understood that real strength doesn't come from vomit, comes from conviction. And as his words rippled outward, they grew beyond him. People repeated them at rallies, whispered them to their children, typed them into posts late at night when they remembered the sting of being told they didn't belong. It wasn't just Patel's moment, anymore it was theirs. Because America's greatness has never come from a single heritage or a narrow vision of belonging. It comes from the mosaic. The worker who crosses oceans, the child who learns a new language at school, the soldier who defends a country their parents once only dreamed of. Fear divides, but difference strengthens. To embrace one another's roots is to plant deeper roots for the nation itself. Patel framed it not as a personal victory, but as a universal reminder. "This isn't about me," he said softly afterward. "It's about every family who came here with hope. It's about the idea that America belongs to all of us who believe in it." That idea struck chords in hearts across the country. And so, the lesson lingered. Arrogance may grab headlines for a moment, but dignity builds legacies. Hate may sting in the instant, but inclusion heals for generations. Patel's calm proved more powerful than her rage. Because rage burns out quickly while calm, rooted in truth, endures. For every immigrant child who ever walked into a classroom and heard whispers of "go back," for every parent who toiled in silence, only to be told they would never belong. For every American whose difference was turned into a weapon against them, Patel's answer offered a kind of quiet justice, a reminder that they are not alone, a reminder that they are, and always have been, part of the American story. And yet, as moving as that night was, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, because dignity is contagious. Once it's witnessed, it demands to be carried forward into conversations, to communities, into movements. The insult had been meant to silence. Instead, it awakened voices. It sparked a conviction that arrogance will falter, but dignity will stand. But the story doesn't end here. It's a movement. Waiting for you, an insult meant to shame, became a moment that uplifted millions. What began as a cruel dismissal, "Go back to India," ended as a declaration of belonging. A reminder that no one can strip away the dignity of those who believe in the American promise. But this isn't just Kash Patel's story. It's your story too. It's the story of every family that sacrificed. Every child who grew up caught between cultures. Every American who has ever been told they don't belong to prove, time and again, that they do. That's why this moment matters. Because it isn't only about politics. It's about identity. It's about pride. It's about the truth that America is strongest when its people, in all their diversity, stand tall together. Patel's calm that night wasn't just his strength. It was the strength of millions watching, nodding, cheering, even tearing up as they saw themselves reflected on that stage. And now, the movement continues with you. Share this story. Talk about it at your dinner table, in your classrooms, in your workplaces. Because every time this story is told, the power of dignity grows stronger and the echo of arrogance fades away. Subscribe to this channel. Join the conversation and be part of a community that refuses to bow to hate. Together, we can turn one debate night moment into a nationwide reminder. America belongs to all of us who believe in it, who build it, who love it. Because when dignity stands tall, arrogance always falls.